Hey there, Aryan film buff Ryan Thompson, and today we will be looking at Road Warrior of the Lost World, which is highly derivative of Mad Max. It's a sort of um, very left leaning film where a nuclear war has brought about a dystopia where a sort of oligarch by the name of Prosser, played by Donald Pleasance, has assembled a Congress to enforce rights and obligations. Now, this is, for the purposes of the film, deemed to be a tyranny that cannot be countenanced because the establishment of any sort of order and structure, amidst chaos, automatically becomes a pathology in that sort of mindset. And film has Robert Ginty that was who was in Paper Chase, and Fred Williamson who was in Black Caesar and Hell Up in Harlem, and Persis Kambata from the first Star Trek movie, and the uh, the Nazi imagery and the pathologizing of an ordered structure is very apparent. You have a people that could be seen as sort of the proxy for the the sort of enlightened types who, you know, work to subvert society, the elite that works to subvert the society in the name of liberal values. These are these enlightened ones who are these sort of spirit creatures who have sort of retreated to an informed and enlightened existence. They do not take part in Prosser's Congress of rights and obligations. That's another thing with the film. It's the whole idea that rights do not necessitate any reciprocal obligations on your part. And the very idea that rights would entail obligations is seen as something abhorrent, which I think gives you some insight into the filmmakers. It was made by David Worth, who, insert early life, and he worked on um, Any Which Way You Can, and what was another film he made called Hard Knocks, and several others. You can look him up. He's a famous director. Anyway, after a conflict with the military muscle of this Congress, Ginty is resuscitated by the advanced medicine of the enlightened ones who want to enlist Ginty's help in order to rescue Persis Kambata's father, who is a teacher named McWade, who sort of has a foot in both camps. He's not really one of the enlightened ones, but he's not really one of the rejects or spiteful mutants, as some professors might call them, of the Outlander world. And Ginty reluctantly agrees because he needs their assistance and their compensation. She tags along. They encounter some radioactive freaks from the war. And of course, something we always seem to see, which is really ironic given how much deviant sexuality is associated with the left, but there's always an attempt to, well, and it's weapons grade projection, as we see. We saw it a lot from the Frankfurt School, where the deviant sexual behavior of the left is not only projected onto the right. We see this with Oliver Stone in JFK. The right are really all repressed homosexuals, or we see this with a lot of the Nazi exploitation films, where all the Nazis were secretly into, scat and fetish and bondage and everything like that. Not only projecting their deviant sexuality onto the right, but acting as though the normal and the healthy and adaptive sexuality that is characteristic more of people on the right is somehow itself a pathology, a neuroticism, you know, a a sort of sublimated fascism, which of course is automatically problematic. You have a computer with a mind of its own, sort of motorcycle precursor to Knight Rider. It doesn't actually talk, but it sort of talks and says sassy things. Of course, a lot of production and manufacturing is going on here, and superlative efficiency. And definitely in the modern globalized world, there are problems with efficiency, but when you have a society and a world that has completely collapsed as a result of a nuclear war, pathologizing efficiency seems to be a bit strange. And let's see if we'll play some early scenes here. This is from his chase with Prosser's guards.
Around here.
Free face, Bolshevik. Red center, stickheads and grinders, move.
Get sort of caught in a crossfire, as it were. And some of them have names like Bolshevik and whatnot. The so-called resistance. Heavenly people. And it's a little from the Bondage show.
And enjoy
The right-wing Bondage show.
entertainment provided.
The concept of silence being an award in and of itself is ironic, considering how much these people these days are censoring speech. Great soundtrack. As you can tell, great soundtrack. Of course, the Nazi symbolism.
You have been found to be inefficient in the society, and therefore you must be terminated.
And this is back when the left was willing to be critical of a cold and a mechanistic society in which efficiency was all that matters, before they championed it.
Dissidents will not be tolerated. Termination
Diverse dissidents.
is automatic.
There's a daring escape by Ginty. And there's Professor McWade, who they make contact with.
Nice shot, Professor. Next stop, Shangri-La.
We don't care one little bit about you and your so-called enlightened elders. The real world is run by men of power.
And again, Donald Pleasance also in this film. Why is he wrong? It's ironic that the film elevates and sanctions these enlightened elders who, are dressed like the Greco-Romans, and of course the Greco-Romans sort of rose to or fell into, depending on one's point of view, and an enlightened age, an age of, questioning and of individualism. And then we had our own Enlightenment, which was, in its ideas and its writing and its architecture, heavily influenced by, well, at least Greece and Rome of a certain era. And the Enlightenment values brought about a society that created the weapons, that created the war, that created the chaos, that necessitated Prosser's Congress and the idea of, rights and reciprocal obligations in the first place. And he's saying, all these platitudes that they speak of, do they actually know how to govern? And they don't, or otherwise we wouldn't be here. And, the film pathologizes that and pathologizes Donald Pleasant's character, but doesn't really explain why that's incorrect or why that's wrong. It asks the question, but it doesn't answer it.
To enforce the law and their obligations. When the system is running efficiently, any change, can be disruptive and must not be tolerated. Your father wants to change our laws and our obligations, and I assure you, it will not be tolerated.
I can assure you, Prosser, you and your crippled society are doomed.
I'm going to teach the professor a lesson he will never forget. I'm going to destroy something he loves even more than his precious new way. I am going to destroy you.
And the new way is really the old way, the way that caused the problem, again, like I said a few minutes ago. And obviously there's a risk with a society stagnating, but stagnation tends to produce a lot less death and a lot less chaos and destruction than perpetual change, and change for its own sake. And it isn't really change, it's sort of, ignoring what happened, sort of pretending the war didn't happen, and go back to the way things were before. And, Prosser, you can agree or disagree with his methods, but, his understandable position is, why the hell would we want to do that? And, again, the film doesn't really... Anyway, so we get to these rejects, and we got a lot of testosterone, going on here. A lot of clicks and grunts, some fist fights, and McWade's like, these are my people. And Ginty is skeptical that such a group can ever be led into anything, or certainly can govern anything, which I think Ginty is where a lot of people in the DR are now. Understandably skeptical of populism. One of the things that's interesting about all of this is that order and law are sort of quintessentially masculine things and masculine energy, and David Worth, as a Smurf, seems to be inverting that and acting as though the quintessentially masculine order that Prosser and the Congress represent are in fact sniveling, cowardly, weak, limp-wristed, and that true masculinity comes from the bottom, from the underdog, from the dregs. And, well, there's certainly, high testosterone is associated with the underclass, the malcontents, the people who wish to reform and change things and question things, tend to be the limp-wristed, more accurately represented by the enlightened ones, but more malcontent and subversive than they appear to be, where the way the film portrays them as sort of angelic creatures. We don't get much of a glimpse into that, but Ginty is being healed. Just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. Fred Williamson explaining how important the Professor is to changing the world for the better.
And to execute him publicly, he must be rescued.
I'm me. You know and I know. Those people are bad news.
Indeed they are. And this tyranny must end. Monsters like Prosser must be stopped. And if Natasha's father is lost, I'm afraid the new way will be permanently damaged.
You're not.
So that gives you some idea. That's not that angelic, but that's more like the people constantly working to change things. So Ginty follows the professor's advice and wins the respect of sort of the Mad Maxers. And then Prosser uses some form of advanced electroshock to try to recondition the professor's daughter to his will. Obviously the product of some sort of interracial relationship, unless Prosser perhaps killed her parents and the professor adopted her. Another motorcycle chase here. He's got to come back and get her. And this time they have the help of the Outlanders with them, who have some Major League toys from all of the military conflict that once existed before the establishment of the Congress. And then this little piece here I thought was insightful. We have the face-off between Pleasance and Ginty and the professor.
No, I should say no. Well, Professor, I hear your progressive new way has allied itself with some rather curious cutthroats. It should make for interesting political appointments.
I'll take marginals to butchers every time.
Of course, the lesser of two evils.
Absolutely. No system is ever without flaws.
So at least in that sense, they're willing to be more realistic, whereas a lot of the brutality and violence and chaos that the left unleashes on the world now, they don't even acknowledge. At least this guy acknowledges, yeah, you know, heads are going to roll, we're going to make some mistakes. That's the way it is. That's reality. Something else that's quite interesting in all of this is that merely punishing those who go against the order makes him a murderer and a butcher. And all of the chaos and the insanity before the Congress was established, that's beside the fact. It very much reminds me of the left today, who just assume that, you know, the material progress or the stability or the order or the structure or the prosperity that the West created was a given, and that the laws, the structures, the punishments, the enforcements of a hierarchy were completely arbitrary or irrespective to progress when one necessitates the other, something they, well, some of them just aren't capable of understanding and others know but choose not to accept.
It be the firing squad?
Oh yeah,
Or will you leave me alone?
this is really quite telling.
Your brand of evil is an abomination. Stripping people of their rights to be different, to be human beings.
Again, also strange here now with where the left has progressed into. To be human is a cancer. We need to go beyond it. We need to stop existing. We need to interface with the metaverse. We need to deny our biology, deny race while simultaneously apologizing for it, and and no toleration of difference, at least of opinion, is allowed at all.
Individuals. Your brand of evil has to be fought to the death. We're well rid of you.
Well said.
And then Pleasance had a line right before here, didn't he? Here we go.
Progressive new way has allied itself with some rather curious.
I'll take
The lesser of two evils.
absolutely. No system is ever without flaws. But your brand of evil is an abomination. Stripping people of their rights to be different, to be human beings, individuals. Your brand of evil has to be fought to the death. We're well rid of you.
Well said. Now, Professor, I suppose your tolerant new way will want its revenge. Shall it be the firing squad?
And again, a good point there. They say they don't want hierarchy, they don't want force, they don't want authority, yet they exercise it themselves, and they understand that the old regime has to be thrown down and replaced with a new regime and authority and hierarchy when they do take power. And so then contradict themselves again. And then this next line here from the professor. Very telling.
Or will you leave me alone with a weapon and trust me to do the right thing?
Whatever happens to you will not be revenge.
The most key line in the entire film. Whatever happens to you won't be revenge. When you defend truth, reason, when you defend hierarchy, when you defend the interests of whites or of your own people, or defend a structure and a civilization that works but requires oppression of others or outgroups who would subvert that, or do not allow in chaos that could destroy that, that's violence, that's oppression, that's force, that's arbitrary. When we do away with those systems that work, when we are willing to send people to the gulags to remake the world according to our utopia, if we just kill off enough people, that is not revenge. That is not violence. When we do it, it's justice. Even though we do it in the name of something chaotic that can't work and can't be maintained, and the people that we oppose do it to preserve something that actually did work, but that we're willing to overthrow. So, a lot of layers there, and it's contained in that. It's all contained in that one phrase.
Revenge is based on hate.
That's right. See, we're not motivated by hate and prejudice when we do it. We're motivated by progress, by justice. Despite the fact that they say false, vengeful, hateful things about cisgendered males, whites, Gentiles, Gentile societies, all the live long day. But that's, even though the things we do are hateful, that's not the motivation. So, the schizoid detachment between thought and action, selective, tactical detachment from thought and action. Only we are detached emotionally from our horrendous actions. Not the people who we're against, whose actions we really essentially have to lie about and pathologize in order to create the idea or the impression that they're hateful. You have to reimagine an understandable action as something disgusting, and then to justify something inexcusable as noble.
And I don't hate you. I pity you. Because you have no soul.
And again, this reminds me of... Now, this is a little bit different because Prosser genuinely sees the Outlanders in the new way as evil, but this reminds me of something that many people have talked about before, which is that modern woke ideology as sort of a Gnostic, zealous, sort of, as William James might have said, religion of the sick soul, whereby the people on the right tend to say, oh, they're just, ridiculous, or they're crazy, or they're silly, or they're genuinely insane and spiteful mutants, but there is not the hatred and the vitriol, whereas the people who believe much more sensible and reasonable things are looked at as soulless, vile bigots who don't speak the truth but just hate for hate's sake and have to be wiped from the face of the earth. And you see, even in his attempt to say, oh, but actually it's the opposite, and you're the ones full of hate and we're not. It's, well, I feel sorry for you because you have no soul. I pity these hateful racists that I want to kill. They understand that what they want, and they understand when the more self-aware ones understand what they want can't work, and that at some fundamental level they are the ones full of hate and they are the ones in the wrong. So they have to pretend to have the upper hand, not just by virtue signaling, but by saying, see, yes, we're behaving this awful, hateful way, and we're rejecting something that is very rational and truthful, but they act out of hate and we don't, and we just feel sorry for them. But then we still have to act like complete psychotic bastards and do what we're going to do. And even though they're nothing like the horrendous woke-tards on the left of today, there is an element of this, because here, something that has created stability and structure in the aftermath of a nuclear Armageddon, no less. He is willing to toss aside and overthrow because a few dissidents get electrocuted in order to espouse the ideas and to go back to the kind of ideas that literally created an Armageddon. And he's not stupid. He knows what happened. These people aren't ignorant of this history. And he's willing to take that risk because he is so ready to pathologize the enforcement of law and order, represented by Donald Pleasance. So, of course, he shows the professor how he's turned her into a good SEAL and tries to get her to kill her own father, which she won't. And she kills him. She shoots Robert Ginty. They end up being okay. And then it turns out that... And they get married. But it turns out that the guy from Hell Up in Harlem has betrayed them all. Is, in fact, working to resurrect Prosser. So obviously a lot of people in this world, because presumably Fred Williamson isn't acting alone, have taken my hint and realized that going back to what created this hellscape in the first place is exactly what we don't want to do. And are perfectly willing to make sure that the Congress, as a governing authority, is maintained. So, the sequel that never was. All the people who actually want to preserve some stability in law and order might have something to say about the dubious machinations of the new way. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed speaking to you, and I'll see you again soon.